It's time for another aside. This one is our first JavaScript aside. That means we are going to talk about some JavaScript concept, some part of the language itself, that will move on to helping us understand Node.js. This JavaScript aside is JavaScript engines and the ECMAScript specification. Oh, and just to avoid any confusion, there is a terminology alert. ECMAScript is the standard that JavaScript is based on. JavaScript was invented first, but then different browser makers like Microsoft, Netscape, they started making their own JavaScript engines and their own little tweaks and changes and differences between them. And the ECMA is an organization that basically is a standard organization that says, hey, let's try and say exactly how something should work. And so ECMAScript is the name for the core standard that JavaScript itself bases itself on. And we needed that standard because there are many engines out there. V8, which Node.js is built on top of, is actually just one of many JavaScript engines. So when we are talking about JavaScript and you are talking about ECMAScript, you can basically think of them as the same thing. But JavaScript is the actual language that you are writing, and ECMAScript is the standard that says how the language should work. It's a core scripting language standard. Alright. But for the purposes of our discussion, they are essentially interchangeable terms. Now, if you want to take a look at the ECMAScript standard, the specification, all you need to do is do a Google search. For example, ECMAScript 2022. And that Google search will get you a link to ECMAinternational.org, and you will see the latest edition. This adding new features to the language, but it's good enough for our purposes at this moment, just because we are trying to make a point. If you look at the specification and go down through it, you would see all sorts of things that JavaScript is supposed to have and supposed to do. It describes its behavior. It describes exactly what should be expected when certain things are done in the language. And therefore, is the standard upon which JavaScript engines should be based. In other words, if you were to write your own JavaScript engine, what you cause JavaScript code to do should match the specification. V8 does that. V8 makes sure that the JavaScript code that is written, the machine code that it's translated to does. And the specification is just a standard that everyone has agreed upon. This is the way JavaScript should work. Well, let's do it in this form. Okay, there is another terminology alert. A JavaScript engine, a program that converts JavaScript code into something the computer processor can understand. And really it should follow the ECMAScript standard, which tells us how the language should work and what features the language should have. V8 is a JavaScript engine and it sits at the core of Node.js. Alright, let's take a look at V8 just a little bit deeper.